Hey, podcast listeners. Tired of ads barging into your favorite news podcasts? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. Stay up to date on everything newsworthy by downloading the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free news. That's amazon.com/ad-free news to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank. And like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
This man has not had due process. This man has not had a fair trial. Convicted of murdering his own 2-year-old daughter, the Attorney General issued a letter. He said the jury did not convict on the basis of shaken baby syndrome. True?
No.
Can you demonstrate what they demonstrated in trial?
They shook it like this to show us how the head would shake violently.
The divide in this case is very simple. It's between those who know the facts of the case and those who don't.
Tonight, I want you to imagine being in the shoes of a man named Robert Roberson. Here's a man who's been sitting on death row for 21 years, convicted of murdering his own 2-year-old daughter, Nikki. But this story isn't as cut and dried as it might seem at first glance. We're dealing with a case that has stirred up so much controversy. On one side, we've got the Texas justice system saying Robert beat his little girl to death. On the other, we've got a group of lawmakers and advocates crying foul, saying this man just might be innocent. Now, I've seen my share of family tragedies, but this one has a lot of twists and turns that I tried to unpack a couple of weeks ago when Robert was just hours away from being executed. We're talking about something that has been called shaken baby syndrome, junk science, autism, pneumonia, and a whole lot of finger pointing. Here's what happened last time.
I'm greatly concerned about the possibility of the state executing Robert Roberson, an innocent man. I looked at Robert's case and saw that there were other medical explanations.
You have two options here. Could it have been shaken baby? Perhaps. Could it have been all of these other things, the pneumonia, the medication, the history? Yes, if they're both reasonable. The jury has to say, I have to choose the innocent one, because it's a reasonable option, and that is reasonable doubt.
I don't know what happened here. I know this man has not had a fair trial, and I'll charge that machine gun nest till hell wouldn't have it. We've been talking a lot about Robert tonight. Now it's time for me to meet him in person.
When I had got up, she wouldn't breathe, and her lips was blue, you know, and then I got her to the hospital, and just because I didn't know exactly what happened to her, because I had found her on the floor, they thought I was guilty, you know.
Is there ever a time that you did anything like you're accused of? That you ever shook her, or
No,
that
sir.
you ever tossed her?
No,
or
sir.
Never, ever?
Never ever.
Take me through the moment that you learned that she, in fact, had died.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. I was sad. And they carried me up from there, threatened me. And when I got to county jail.
What do you think's going to happen?
I don't know. I can't look in the future.
Well, I have to look you in the eye and ask you straight up.
Yes, sir.
Did you in any way injure that little girl intentionally or otherwise?
No, sir, because I'm not guilty.
With the clock ticking and Robert's life hanging in the balance, a group of lawmakers in Texas decided they weren't going to let this execution take place. They pulled out all the stops, and they did something unheard of. They issued a subpoena for Robert to testify before the House Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence. We covered it all right here on Merit TV.
Today, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles denied Roberson's request for clemency.
A man sitting on death row for over 2 decades. You just saw him. He is now scheduled to be executed in just a matter of hours.
Well, the governor still has power to stop the execution. Even without the board's vote, the governor can issue a 30-day reprieve, which would give an opportunity for Robert to get back into court.
A Texas House committee just issued a subpoena last night for Roberson to appear in court later this month.
It's unprecedented, it's historic, but let me tell you what it also is. It's necessary.
Right now, we can tell you the Texas Supreme Court, they stepped in at the 11th hour, delaying the scheduled execution. Now, that move comes after state lawmakers requested Roberson testify at a hearing next week.
A victory for tonight. Robert Roberson's execution has been halted. The fight goes on, and he lives another day.
He praised God and he thanked his supporters.
A lot of caring people were working around the clock on this, and I've been in this business a long time, and I can tell you what these lawmakers did was nothing short of remarkable. They stood up and said, hold on just a minute. We need to make really sure we're not about to execute an innocent man. And let me tell you, that's exactly the kind of backbone we need in our lawmakers, because there's a lot more hanging in the balance than just Robert Roberson. Given the history here, if this gets done wrong, the entire future of capital punishment in the state of Texas, in my opinion, hangs in the balance and should. But now we have a showdown unfolding between the 3 branches of government. Merit TV's own Loni Coombs, a former prosecutor for the LA District Attorney's Office, simplifies this governmental tug-of-war over Robert.
So what happens next in the case of Robert Roberson? Well, it all comes down to a battle of the branches of government here in Texas. Now, let's go through this real quick. We have the legislative branch. They make the laws. We've got the judicial branch. They're the ones that oversee the trials, the convictions, and they impose the sentence. Then we have the executive branch. They're the ones who actually enforce the sentence that's given down. Now, in Robert's case, he went through the judicial branch. He was tried, he was convicted, and he was sentenced to the death penalty. The executive branch then stepped in and they handed down an order for him to be executed. But here is where things went haywire. Remember the legislative branch, the ones who make the laws? Well, they also sometimes look at laws that they've made to make sure that they're being applied in the courtrooms the way they intended. The day before Robert was set to be executed, the lawmakers started a hearing looking at this junk science law, and in particular, Robert's case. They decide that they need Robert to testify in the hearing. So they issue a subpoena, a legislative subpoena, saying, we want Robert to come testify in our hearing 4 days after the execution date is scheduled. So suddenly you had a battle set up, pitting these 2 branches of government against each other. Well, the legislature went to a lower court and said, hey, we think that our subpoena should be honored, so please put a temporary restraining order on the execution order so we can have Robert testify. And the lower court agreed. Well, the executive branch didn't like that, so then they went to the highest criminal court in Texas, the Criminal Court of Appeals, and said, we think that our executive order should be honored, so lift that temporary restraining order. And they did, and the execution was back on. Now, the legislature's not ready to give up, so then they go to the highest civil court, which is the Texas Supreme Court, and they say, no, our subpoena should be honored. We have the authority to issue this subpoena. Please put that restraining order back in place so we can be honored as well. Well, the Supreme Court said, you're right, this is a civil subpoena, not a criminal subpoena. So not only do we have 2 branches of government fighting it out, but now we have the 2 highest courts in Texas, the Criminal Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, also taking sides against each other. Well, while they're all battling this out, Robert's still alive, but it's only temporary. We don't know how long he'll be safe.
Well, this case had been gnawing at my conscience, so I decided to stand up and testify in front of the Texas House Committee in Austin for over 2 hours. I broke down the facts of this case as I saw them, and I didn't mince words. I told the legislators that I am 100% convinced we're facing a miscarriage of justice in this case. My professional opinion is that this is not a man with malice. This is not someone that hurt this child. What I can tell you that goes beyond opinion, after examining the record in this case, this man has not had due process. This man has not had a fair trial. And if we start executing people in Texas absent due process, absent fair trial, we are going down a really dangerous road. That is not something that I can support. This is a calendar of the 2 years of this child's life, and every red notation is a doctor or hospital visit during her young life. This was a child that was acutely and chronically ill. On the left is a scan of her lungs, and on the right is a normal lung. This never got in front of a jury. Juries decide these things on what they see and hear, not on what they don't see and hear. Was a massive amount of outcome determinative, exculpatory evidence that was never reviewed. It was never put in front of the jury. It was never heard. I made the point before this committee that, in my opinion, depriving someone of their liberty in the United States under our Constitution comes at a high standard. Depriving someone of their life comes at a very high standard. And when we talk about reasonable doubt, what that means is that 12 people, having heard all the facts in a case, should be able to go into a room, sit down, and there be nothing about which they could reasonably differ. Now, in this case, I just don't think that ever happened. I don't think he ever got due process. I support the jury system. I think the jury tends to get it right if they hear all the evidence. In this case, what they heard, in my opinion, was flawed evidence. And I made very clear to this committee, I'm not a physician, even though I was showing some evidence that was medical in nature. But I can read pathology reports just as a typical jury could, if they're provided. Coming up, we're going to meet a juror that was on Robert's trial, and she says that her conscience couldn't rest as Robert's execution date loomed. She'll tell us why it bothered her so much after the break. Supply chain issues are on the rise, whether caused by natural disasters like Hurricanes Helene and Milton, global conflict, or worldwide inflation. The impacts are being felt across the board. When there's an urgent need for essential items like medications, these delays can become catastrophic. In the face of disruptions and cutoffs, how will you care for yourself and your loved ones? The Jace case provides peace of mind for families during times of shortages, delays, and disaster. It's an emergency medication kit containing 5 life-saving antibiotics that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections. By completing a simple online evaluation, you'll be prepared for the unexpected. Don't wait until it's too late. The time to prepare is now. Right now, you can receive a discount on your Jace case. Just go to jace.com and enter promo PHIL at checkout. That's promo code PHIL at jace, JASE.com, ensuring you have the right medications when you need them most.
Everything that was presented to us was all about shaken baby syndrome. Nothing else was ever mentioned or presented to us to consider. If it had been, I would have had a different opinion and I would have found him not guilty.
In 2003, Terre Compton served as a juror in Robert Roberson's capital murder trial. Now, she has recently voiced doubts about the verdict, and she's joined by Merit TV's and former Los Angeles prosecutor Loni Coombs. Let me be real clear about what we're talking about here. We're talking about science that has been since debunked. And what we're talking about is a specific syndrome called shaken baby syndrome that has what are called a triad of symptoms. And that means there are 3 things that when you see these, oftentimes emergency room physicians would conclude, based on the science, that this comes from shaken baby, correct? And what we're talking about is retinal hemorrhaging in the eyes, subdural hematoma, bleeding inside the cavity of the brain. And when you see those two things and you add to it swelling of the brain, that would be the triad of symptoms. Now, since then, science has evolved to the point that the medical community no longer concludes that. They said, no, there are a lot of other things that would create those same three symptoms in unison. So you can no longer conclude that when you see that, it means a baby has been shaken. Fair statement?
Correct. It is an option still,
sure,
but it's not the definitive conclusion.
Right. Terre says that the jury was told by both the prosecution and the defense that this was a shaken baby case, correct?
Correct.
Did you hear any alternative explanations?
No, sir. The defense, even in their own testimony and in their closing arguments, concluded that it was a shaken baby syndrome case. He offered no expert witnesses, no witnesses, and he also did not give us any other type of explanation that could even halfway give us something else to try to consider.
You were watching my testimony, and you saw the calendar where I showed that this baby had been to the doctor and or hospital 47 times in 23 months and a few weeks of life. That wasn't shown to you?
No, sir. None of that type of information was ever presented to us.
Weren't told that she was born acutely ill?
No.
And were you ever shown this picture of her lung showing interstitial pneumonia?
No, sir.
And you're certain that it was a shaken baby case? That's how it was defined. In fact, there was a demonstration given, right?
Yes, sir.
With a teddy bear. Do we have one on standby? Okay. Can you take this teddy bear and demonstrate what they demonstrated in trial?
Prosecutors kind of went like this and shook it like this to show us how the head would shake violently back and forth of somebody shaking a child. And that's where they were trying to explain to us where they got the blunt force trauma in her head that caused all the brain damage and bruising in her head was from where basically her brain was hitting the outer side of her brain.
Now, the Attorney General, Paxton, recently said this involved a murdered 2-year-old daughter by beating her. The jury did not convict on the basis of shaken baby syndrome, that he was lawfully sentenced to death and had exhausted all available appellate avenues, and the legislators interfered with the justice system by disregarding separation of powers. But the key element here that I'm focusing on is him saying the jury did not convict on the basis of shaken baby syndrome. Is that true?
No, we totally convicted him on shaken baby syndrome.
Loni, what do you make of this?
You know, Dr. Phil, as a former prosecutor, I was very interested in reading this letter from the Attorney General to see the way they laid out this case. We know that they don't want this to be a shaken baby case because then it would fall under the junk science law, which says you should have relief, you should have a chance at a new trial. They said in their paper, the evidence of blunt force trauma precluded, that's the word they used, precluded the possibility that the child died from being shaken. And yet the trial testimony from their own case shows over and over again that their case was based on shaken baby, that their own doctors talked about it was shaken baby. So for whatever reason, the AG is now putting out this paper trying to deny that it was a shaken baby case, and it just does not make sense. It doesn't pass the smell test.
Well, and it was certainly tried as a shaken baby case.
Yes.
The defense stipulated it was a shaken baby case. The prosecutors pursued it as a shaken baby case, and the jury deliberated as a shaken baby case.
Yes.
But now they're saying, no, it wasn't a shaken baby case.
Right, right. Exactly.
Right.
Because science has evolved to the point that they would need, under the law, to disallow that evidence because it has been debunked under the Daubert rule of junk science, and therefore he would get a new trial.
A new trial, that's exactly right.
Just over a week ago, the Texas House Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence held a 9-hour hearing on the case of Robert Roberson. Now, Robert, who was subpoenaed, did not testify due to a dispute over in-person versus virtual testimony. I was there, along with several others, who spoke about how there were many issues with Robert's conviction.
Robert's trial was grossly unfair. The science was terrible. The science has been debunked and discredited and disproven now for the past 15 years.
I'm ashamed that I was so focused on finding an offender and convicting someone that I did not see Robert. I did not hear his voice. He's an innocent man. And we are very close to killing him for something he did not do.
Constitutional officers of the state of Texas, where a man's life literally hangs in the balance, and we are contemplating the government exercising the ultimate and most awesome power that we give a government, and that is to take a life. We cannot get this wrong.
Literally, in my eyes, was killing a man that I knew was innocent, and I was going to have to live with that.
Well, we've got some heavy hitters joining us tonight to talk about Robert's case that has everyone from the State House to the courthouse buzzing. Democratic Representative Joe Moody is the chair of the House Committee on Criminal Jurisprudence, and he's been leading the charge to get to the bottom of Robert's case. Republican Representative Lacey Hull and Brian Harrison both are not afraid to ask the tough questions. And alongside these legislators is Robert's defense attorney, Gretchen Sween. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. I'm so proud to say this is absolutely a bipartisan issue because, look, we're talking about a man's life here, and nobody wants to get this wrong. Representative Moody, what has made you spearhead the call for Robert's retrial?
Our criminal justice system is a reflection of us as a society. What do we think is wrong? What do we think is right? How do we punish that? And so it should be done correctly. Even if you're a supporter of capital punishments, there's no quicker way to undermine that than by sending an innocent person to die. And, to the point of bipartisanship, there is no political stripes when it comes to justice. Anyone that walks in a courtroom, whether that's a prosecutor, defense attorney, the accused, or victim, should all see equal justice under the law. That should be the true north that we look towards.
What is your response to Attorney General Ken Paxton's statement that you're interfering with the separation of powers?
I want to start off by saying that I am a very conservative Republican, longtime supporter of capital punishment, and a supporter of Attorney General Ken Paxton. But I want to real quick go back to this piece of bipartisanship because I do think this is being falsely characterized as a Democrat-led effort to abolish the death penalty. And I would like to speak for those of us who support capital punishment by saying I think it is most incumbent upon us to ensure that innocent people are never subjected to capital punishment. And I will say on the Office of the Attorney General's statement, I was surprised to see it because everything in the record of this case was that it was a shaken baby case. And I was disappointed when the Office of the Attorney General characterized it as saying that the jury convicted him of beating his child to death because that's just nowhere in the record. And the last point I would make is this isn't a divide on this case between Republicans or Democrats, guilty or innocent. The divide in this case is very simple. It's between those who know the facts of the case and those who don't.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And Gretchen, you think the government is just flat out spreading misinformation?
I do, Dr. Phil. I think that testimony like yours was so powerful. And what the committee was doing in front of the world was so devastating that somebody made a decision to play dirty. And what we've seen thereafter is just a lot of misinformation about Robert, about the case, about his history being sent out into the public sphere that makes you pause and think, if they're so confident in this case, why the dirty tricks? And if they have all this terrible stuff about Robert, why didn't they get it into the trial in the first place? And I think that should disturb every Texan. The highest law enforcement officer in the land is behind something that seems like a desperate attempt to shut down the quest for the truth.
Representative Hill, you agree that we're looking just to ensure that there's due process and that the truth comes forward here.
Yes, exactly. I do not believe that Robert was afforded his fundamental right of due process, and Texans deserve to know that we have a fair and just justice system, and that cannot be said if Robert is executed. That cannot be said until Robert gets a new trial.
Is it your position that this particular case is not a shaken baby case?
Based on the evidence that was presented at the original trial, whereas Dr. Urban said that shaking was a component, but that Nikki died from blunt force trauma, it was agreed to based on the totality of all the evidence that was presented as far as Mr. Roberson saying himself to his psychiatrist at the time, Nikki was crying, I lost it, I shook her. Yes, we believe that's a component, but that's all that it is. It's not solely a shaken baby case, which distinguishes it from Rourke.
Well, that was Anderson County District Attorney Allison Mitchell answering questions from Representative Moody at the hearing about Robert Roberson's murder trial in 2003. You just heard Allison Mitchell talking about a psychologist that she referred to as a psychiatrist. Let's not worry about details here. Saying that he had said, okay, I snapped and shook her. In context, I believe that there's also evidence that this same psychologist had counseled him to just confess and then just kill himself once he got to prison. True?
Yes, Dr. Phil, and I think Robert even shared that with you when you met with him, because it's haunted him all these years. And what she said at trial is, I wouldn't take no for an answer. I kept on him until he would admit that he lost it and shook her. He never said that. This was the psychologist at trial bragging about bullying this autistic guy. What she didn't reveal is that she also said, you know, you can just go kill yourself after you get convicted and move into general population.
This individual's not here, and so these are just allegations, not saying that's what happened, but you feel pretty strongly about this, and I'm sure she would say otherwise. There was also a letter from a unidentified cellmate. That came out in the record, correct?
Yes, sir.
That came out from Attorney General Paxton as well.
Yeah, and this is one of the biggest problems with what General Paxton released. Jailhouse snitch testimony. It is when you've got other people in the jail or in the prison that are going to say, oh, well, I have evidence against this one, see if I can get a better deal. And this was used time and time again in tons of cases. In fact, it's so unreliable that we changed the law in Texas that says you cannot use this type of evidence unless it's corroborated by something else, because it's so unreliable. It led to tons of wrongful convictions. And in this case, you had a story that was being spun by this jailhouse snitch that was so vastly different from the facts of the case that even the prosecutor at the time didn't try to introduce it into trial. They couldn't proffer that testimony because it would have been lies.
Well, the criminal history of this individual has 40 convictions for both misdemeanors and felonies in at least 3 states. And to avoid long prison terms, made a career of volunteering to serve as an informant. And I think we found 5 other letters that he's written. Yeah. And as it turns out, he wasn't a cellmate of Robert's at all.
No, if the Attorney General is willing to put that out there in the public as fact today, that should call everything into question that they're putting out there, because it is verifiably false.
Well, there was a state jailhouse informant letter where this individual said, I spoke to you about Robert Robertson's case. He put in an extra T. That's how well he knew him. About a child a while back. I wanted to know, will I be used to testify in court? Most all of you told me that the DA, Mark Calhoun, would give me my back time, 269 days. I've not received my back time. You told me he was working on it, but nothing yet.
Trying to cut a deal. And that is why this type of testimony is wildly unreliable.
Loni, would you use this as a prosecutor?
Absolutely not. And what really bothers me is when you read the press release from the Attorney General's office, he writes about it like it was credible evidence. He almost implies that it was put in front of the jury when it wasn't. And he goes into very, very graphic detail about what this cellmate supposedly heard Robert say about sexual abuse. Anyone who reads this statement comes away thinking, oh my goodness, I mean, that's shocking. It inflames you against Robert, and yet it is so not credible, not true, and for the Attorney General to stoop so low, I mean, I think it's unethical.
When you're talking about a man's life, there should be rules of evidence, and I made the statement that seems so obvious that jurors make their decisions based on what they see and hear. But when you make an allegation of sexual abuse of a 2-year-old little girl, that can really taint people's thoughts, feelings, beliefs, heart in a really ugly way. And there's zero evidence that anything like that took place by him or anyone else.
Correct, Dr. Phil. They accused Robert of sexually abusing his 2-year-old daughter. They indicted him for that based on a nurse's suspicion that was never substantiated. And that's one reason this whole jailhouse snitch thing came along. They were looking for some way to substantiate, but they'd already sent all the physical evidence to DPS for testing, and it all come back without anything to support it.
Well, here's what the DPS results said. No semen detected, no spermatozoa were detected, no trace evidence was detected on the debris collection paper, which is a very sensitive test, by the way. So there was zero evidence of any supporting nature whatsoever, correct?
Correct. And so it was a real problem at trial to put this allegation in front of the jury. And then because it was not really substantiated, it gets dropped right before jury deliberation.
Yeah, we call this payoff. You know, when somebody is making an opening statement, they can't argue the evidence yet, so they have to say, we believe the evidence will show, and then they go through all of this, and then the jury, if they're being diligent, they'll say, they told us what they're going to bring us, let's pay attention and see if they did. And then when it came time to argue the evidence, not a word was said about sexual assault. It wasn't on the jury charge, it wasn't in the closing argument, they just dropped it. They put it up front to get everybody riled up and be looking at this guy over there like he is the devil incarnate. Mm-hmm. And then once they've poisoned the waters, don't even bring it up again. Does that seem fair to you?
Not at all. One of the many reasons he needs a new fair trial, because he never had one. It's so clear.
Can I make a point on that real quick? Because it's really important when people hear and it's portrayed this way, and every headline on this case will say convicted murderer. Well, that is true. A jury did find him guilty of murder. But I think when Texans and when Americans hear this, I think fairly, they make an assumption that a jury heard the strongest evidence the state had of his guilt, and then they heard the strongest evidence of his innocence. But as we know now, the prosecution was saying this was a shaken baby case. The defense said it was a shaken baby case. Well, therefore, there wasn't much left for the jury to decide. No jury at any point in time over the last 20 years has ever heard arguments or evidence of this man's innocence. But instead, what they did hear, and it was too graphic in nature for me to articulate here on your show, Dr. Phil, they did hear very graphic concepts of things that he might have done to this poor little girl.
Yeah, and some of it articulated by this jailhouse snitch. Mm-hmm. And I said, I thought the jury got it right, based on what you heard.
We never got any sexual charges brought to us as a jury.
Robert Roberson has been on death row now for over 21 years. He still is under the weight of a death sentence. It is currently in limbo, and when a new date is requested, a new death certificate will be issued, and there will be a 90-day period after that. And so we have some time to work with, but that goes by really fast because the wheels of justice turn really slow. Attorney General Ken Paxton wrote that Robert Roberson's own mother said at one time, one of these days he's going to kill her, and it's going to be too late for anyone to do anything about it. Well, Robert's sister-in-law was attributed to this quote, "This is an utter and complete vicious lie. Carolyn Roberson was his #1 supporter. If she could get a pass from God to come back here from heaven, she would set the record straight. Robert's brother said, "This is an outright lie. Our mother believed in him with every ounce of her being. She went to her grave fighting for him." So they have responded to this in the strongest possible way. And here's the thing. I don't know what happened at that house. I'm very confident in saying that he did not harm this child, even accidentally. But because I wasn't there, I don't know that. But I can say, having read the trial transcript, having read the expert reports, having read all the supporting documentation, and studying the science associated with shaken baby syndrome and the medical reports of this baby's short life, that he has not had due process and a fair trial. And I can say with 100% certainty that he's entitled to that. And given the questions that have been raised, why would they not do that? Loni, if you were prosecuting this case, wouldn't you want to know you had it right?
Absolutely. You know, Dr. Phil, a lot of people think prosecutors are just supposed to rack up the convictions. We're supposed to seek justice. We're supposed to follow the facts wherever they lead us to get to the truth. It is just as important to us to make sure we get it right, and if we got it wrong, to fix it. Because we don't want the wrong person going to jail or being executed. Let's be honest, we have more power than the defense attorneys do to stand up and say, we want to make sure to get it right. They should be the ones leading the charge into the court and saying, we need a new trial in this case. That's what should be happening.
And see, this, Dr. Phil, if I had a prosecutor like that on the other side, we would not be here today.
No.
Robert would not be in peril. But the person with the power to have those conversations has given me a slam door. She has not read any of those new expert reports that you've read that convinced you of a miscarriage of justice. How can that be?
And see, this is what I'm not understanding. Why are you so afraid to give him a new trial? What is the thing that you all are so afraid of?
And to both your point and your point, I don't know who needs to hear this, but it should be uncontroversial that executing a potentially innocent person is the exact opposite of justice.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, 100%. I'm going to use this time to ask for a call to action here, because we have a man that is sitting on death row. If you haven't been to death row, you can let your imagination run wild and you won't have captured what it's like to be on death row. This is where I interviewed Robert Roberson. You're waiting for him to come and get you and put you to death, and you know and truly believe that you're innocent. And I'm not asking or advocating that they just go down there and turn him loose. He has been diagnosed in 2018 as being on the spectrum, as having autism. His ability to assist in his own defense, I think, was certainly compromised. I think he didn't have the most vigorous defense, and I think he's entitled to it. And I think as the state of Texas, we need to hold our head high when we say that we have justice in this state. And all of you can write to the Attorney General, to the governor, and you can express your beliefs that this man's entitled to a new trial based on what you know. And all you have to do is scan this QR code that you're seeing right now. Just get your camera, aim it at it, and a little yellow bar will come up under it. You click that, and you can sign the petition for Roberson and become part of those that are suggesting that he get a new trial. You're not passing judgment. You're not saying, hey, I've decided from my couch at home that this is an innocent man. You're just saying, I think he should get a new trial and let all the evidence.
I haven't heard half of it. No.
So I don't take these just because somebody asks. I study them before I get behind them. But when I get behind them, I go all in.
We're so grateful. And Robert's grateful.
It's my honor. We do have a brief letter from Robert that I will read. I'm so very proud of Dr. Phil for sure. Okay, I heard that he did a very great and very wonderful job for sure. Okay, I wish that I could have been there with you all. Okay, but they wouldn't let me. Okay, I wanted to be there in Austin at the state capitol to testify the whole truth for myself also, okay? I do believe that it's very important for me to be there also, okay? Thank you all for believing in me and in my actual innocence, okay? Your friend, Robert. I think he should be heard.
I think so too. When we went to death row to meet with him, we prayed. One of the things he prayed about was maintaining his hope. And then he said a prayer for us in doing our work and our job. And it's a day he told us he would never forget. And we assured him that is a day none of us will ever forget.
Well, I tell you, you three make me proud to call myself a Texan.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of my guests today. Gretchen Sween, Representative Joe Moody, Representative Lacey Hull, Representative Brian Harrison, and News on Merritt Street co-anchor Loni Coombs. Thank you for being here. And Terry, thank you for being a juror. You did your job with what you had. So please understand, you got it right based on what you had.
And thank you so much, Dr. Phil, for letting me come here and try to help, right or wrong. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate it. And thanks to you at home for finding us here on Merritt TV. To be a Merritt TV insider, just text me at 59627 and simply type in Phil, P-H-I-L, and we'll keep you posted every step of the way of what we're doing and everything that's going on, important things like we're talking here. I told you this show was going to be important, studio audience. Did I tell you the truth? Did I tell you the truth? Yeah. Thank you. Good night.
Hey moms, looking for some lighthearted guidance on this crazy journey we call parenting?
Join me, Sabrina Kohlberg.
And me, Andy Mitchell, for Pop Culture Moms,
where each week we talk about what we're watching
and examine our favorite pop culture moms up close to try to pick up some parenting hacks along the way.
Come laugh, learn, and grow with us as we look for the best tips.
And maybe a few what not to do's from our favorite fictional moms.
From Good Morning America and ABC Audio.
Pop Culture Moms. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.